My name is David, and I used to believe that family is the greatest blessing a man can have. But life taught me that sometimes the people you trust the most can destroy you with a smile on their face. I was living peacefully, managing the small property my father left for me after his death. A modest house, some land, and a small shop that gave me enough to live with dignity. I never asked for more than what I had, and I was happy. But my uncle and his family could never tolerate that happiness. They watched me like hawks, whispering behind my back, mocking my simple lifestyle, and plotting quietly in the shadows. At first I ignored them, thinking it was just jealousy that would fade away, but I was wrong. My uncle was greedy, and he wanted to take everything my father had left me. He pretended to care, pretending to be a well-wisher in public, but behind closed doors he was planning my destruction. One night everything changed. Police arrived at my door with loud knocks, dragging me out of my home in front of neighbors, accusing me of a crime I didn't even understand. I was shocked, confused, and broken. They said there was a charge against me, a fake case, carefully planted by none other than my uncle. He had bribed the police to write false statements, create forged papers, and make it look like I was a criminal. My neighbors whispered, my friends turned away, and my dignity was shattered in a single night. I begged the officers to listen, to check for witnesses, to investigate properly, but they laughed in my face and tightened the cuffs on my wrists. My uncle stood at a distance, his face calm, even smiling slightly, as if he was enjoying the sight of me dragged like a criminal. That night I realized I was alone, completely alone in a battle I never wanted, but was forced to fight. They locked me up in a cell, the smell of damp walls and rusted iron filling my senses, and for the first time in my life, I felt what betrayal really meant. My uncle's plan was simple, to keep me locked up, buried under fake charges, until he could transfer my father's property into his name. But as I sat in that dark cell, broken yet breathing, a fire lit inside me, a fire of survival, of justice, of revenge. I told myself I would not die in this hell. I would not let my uncle's greed bury me. No matter how long it took, no matter how much I had to suffer, one day I would rise again. And on that day, my uncle would learn that betrayal has a price. Asterisk. The days inside that dark cell turned into weeks, and the weeks slowly became months. Yet there was no sign of justice for me, because every time my hearing came up, my uncle would bribe the police officers or pay off corrupt lawyers to delay the case, adding false papers and producing fake witnesses who had never even seen me, all of them repeating the lies they were told. I sat in the courtroom like a criminal, my heart pounding, unable to defend myself, because nobody wanted to hear the truth. Every evening, when I returned to the prison cell after yet another humiliation, I felt myself sinking into despair. But then I would remember my father's face, his voice telling me, "David, never let anyone steal your dignity." And those words kept me alive. In the prison yard, surrounded by thieves and murderers, I stayed silent, watching, learning how men carried pain and anger inside them, and I told myself that I would one day use my suffering as a weapon. Some nights I cried silently into my hands, the loneliness eating me alive, especially when I thought of how my uncle must be living in my house, eating from my kitchen, walking across my father's land, as if it had always belonged to him. That thought hurt more than the cold floor or the tasteless prison food. It was a knife twisted into my heart. But even as I suffered, I started to plan. I began writing letters, collecting small bits of evidence, remembering every detail of my uncle's lies, every face of the officers who had taken bribes, and every lawyer who had turned a blind eye. For 10 long years I carried that burden like a silent soldier, never forgetting, never forgiving. My body grew weaker, but my mind grew sharper, and though my uncle thought he had won, he had only planted the seed of his own destruction. Revenge does not come quickly. It grows quietly like fire hidden under ashes, waiting for the right moment to rise. Asterisk. After years of battling courtrooms, delays, and lies, the day of my release finally came, not because my uncle showed mercy, but because his influence had weakened with time, and his bribes no longer worked as easily as they once did. The judge, tired of seeing the same case dragged on without solid proof, finally dismissed most of the charges, and I walked out of prison, a free man, but not the same man who had walked in. I stepped into the sunlight, squinting, feeling both relief and emptiness at once, because in those 10 years I had lost everything: my youth, my friends, my reputation, and the peace of my mind. My uncle, on the other hand, was still living in my father's house, enjoying the wealth he had stolen, and people in the town had long forgotten who the real owner was. They now respected him as a wealthy man, while I was nothing more than an ex-prisoner. Some even crossed the street to avoid me, whispering that jail had changed me. They did not know how right they were. It had changed me, but not into a criminal. It had turned me into a man with a single purpose: to reclaim my dignity and destroy the man who had destroyed me. With no money in my pocket and no one willing to help me, I started from the bottom. I took small jobs, lifting bricks at construction sites, cleaning shops, and working long hours under the hot sun. My hands bled, my body ached, but with each coin I earned, I felt myself building not just a life, but also the foundation of my revenge. I lived quietly, avoiding attention, but every night I wrote in a notebook documenting every lie my uncle had told, every property paper he had forged, and every bribe he had given. I started gathering witnesses who had once stayed silent, but now, after years, were willing to whisper the truth. Slowly, patiently, I built a web, the same way a spider builds its trap, waiting for the right moment. I knew it would not be quick, and I knew it would not be easy. But after losing 10 years of my life, I was willing to wait another 10 if it meant seeing my uncle fall. The world saw me as a broken man, but inside I was sharper, stronger, and hungrier than ever before, and I swore to myself that the next time I faced my uncle, he would not be smiling. He would be begging. The years that followed were my quiet war, and I fought it with patience, silence, and an iron will. My uncle still believed I was weak, broken, and forgotten, but what he did not know was that every step I took in rebuilding my life was a step closer to his ruin. I used the money I had saved to hire a lawyer who wasn't afraid of corruption, and together we dug through every dirty secret my uncle had buried. I found clerks who had once processed the fake documents, police officers who had retired and no longer feared speaking the truth, and neighbors who, with time, grew bold enough to admit they had seen my uncle bribe his way into my father's property. Slowly, the mountain of lies he had built started to crack. When the case reopened, my uncle walked into the courtroom with the same arrogance he had shown 10 years earlier. But this time, I was not alone. This time I had evidence, witnesses, and the law on my side. The look on his face, when the first witness spoke against him, was something I will never forget. It was the first crack in his armor, the beginning of his fall. The trial lasted months, but with each hearing, his lies unraveled, and by the end, the judge declared all the property rightfully mine. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as I stood there, reclaiming not just the land and house, but also my dignity. My uncle, once proud and feared, was exposed as a fraud and thief. His wealth crumbled when he was ordered to repay fines and legal costs, and his so-called friends abandoned him the same way he had abandoned me. Years later, when fate decided it was time to show me the final act of his punishment, I was walking past a bus station when I saw a frail, hunched figure sitting on the ground, his clothes torn, his hands stretched out, begging for coins. I froze, my heart pounding as I recognized the face. It was my uncle, the man who had once stolen my peace, who had dragged me into prison, who had laughed at my pain, was now reduced to nothing. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, were now hollow, begging strangers who didn't even look at him. For a moment I simply stood there, watching the cruel justice of life unfold. He looked up at me, shame and fear mixing in his eyes, and whispered, "David Ian, please." But I did not bend, I did not rage, I did not cry. I only leaned closer and said, "This is the revenge I promised myself, the revenge I never needed to give, because life gave it to you." I dropped a coin in his trembling hand, not out of pity, but as a reminder that the man he tried to bury was the one now standing tall, while he was nothing but dust on the road. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I ever had before, because Revenge had been served, not with my hands but by the weight of his own greed and betrayal crushing him into the ground.